My name is Debo rah Dwork, and I'm the director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. I am also an author. My most recent book, Saints and Liars, tells the stories of a number of Americans who went to Europe to offer relief and ultimately to rescue. Researching my first book on the Holocaust, Children with a Star, I found myself in Friend's house, the Quaker archive in Philadelphia. Sifting through the papers, I found a photograph of a woman, an American Quaker, holding a Jewish child in her arms. I looked at that photograph and I said to myself, who are you? What in the world prompted you to leave the safety of the United States to help Jews in Europe? 25 years later, and maybe half a dozen books, I found myself returning to that woman and widening my lens to operatives of other faith-based organizations. The micro-histories that emerged tell us much about many factors that get lost in a larger frame. The narrative arc of Saints and Liars goes from hotspot to hotspot of relief and rescue activities. And some of the things that emerge are, for example, the role of women. Women figured prominently in relief and rescue work. Now, philanthropy and service had long been women's work, but this philanthropy and this service abroad opened avenues for independent action that the women had not even imagined before. It offered them freedom from social norms, ability to move about in a way that was different, and they were changed by their activities. A second point is the role of the unpredictable and the irrational. The unpredictable, luck, chance, fortuitous circumstance, and the irrational, sympathies, antipathies, whim. I'm not underestimating the importance of ideology, policy, and practice. Were it not for ideology, policy, and practice, the victims would not have been targeted by the Nazi regime. But what I am saying, as life is lived on the ground, the unpredictable and the irrational shaped circumstances. Let me give you an example of the way in which the role of the unpredictable and the irrational functioned. Alarmed by the aggression of Nazi Germany against Czechoslovakia, the Unitarian leadership in Boston founded a committee for service in Czechoslovakia, and they appointed a minister, Waitstill Sharp, and his wife, Martha, to go to Prague to offer relief. Not rescue, but relief. This was after the Germans had gobbled up Sudetenland, but before the Einmarsch, the invasion on March 15, 1939. The Einmarsch was the turning point. And with the Einmarsch, the Sharps looked only to rescue, not to relief. Let me do a reading from Saints and Liars to give you an idea of the role of the unpredictable and the irrational. With the Einmarsch, German officers crowded into the city's hotels, including the Hotel Atlantic, where the Sharps roomed. Germany jammed BBC transmissions. There were no newspapers. The Sharps, like many others, were subject to constant surveillance on the streets and elsewhere. The sole principle that prevailed now was to act responsibly, the Sharps held. But whom to help? This question plagued relief and rescue workers throughout the Nazi era. The Unitarians' mission was clear in principle: save leaders with liberal values who would return to their countries of origin to rebuild democratic states when the Third Reich fell. They were the worthwhile people, mostly male, universally well-educated, and predominantly middle class. But life on the ground widened the Sharps' scope. And when an opportunity opened, not 10 days after the Einmarsch to lead a convoy of 35 desperate people, Martha took ownership immediately. Friday, March 24, 1939. Waitstill was in Brussels when Tessa Roundtree, an English Quaker in Prague representing the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia, called BCRC, tapped Martha to conduct a group of refugees to England. Their papers were in order. The adults had British visas identifying them as domestic workers, and they had German exit permits. Roundtree would accompany some 50 on a train departing at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Would Martha take the rest on a 4:30 train? Martha was an American and a minister's wife. Those were factors in her favor. She did not have an exit permit, but as she had arrived before the invasion, she could get one locally. She did not need to apply to Berlin. Martha understood that the mission was fraught with danger and risk. I knew that the, quote, household workers included some of the most wanted politicals, ardent and well-known anti-Nazis. If the Gestapo should charge us with assisting the enemies of the state to escape, prison would be a light sentence. Torture and death were the more usual punishment. But, she calculated, saving endangered people seemed worth the risk. Once she decided, Martha raced against the clock to get the papers she needed. She turned to the U.S. legation, which phoned the Gestapo on her behalf, to ask for an exit and re-entry visa. The officer agreed to issue them in 10 days. Martha hurried to the Gestapo office to press the process forward in person. It was closed for lunch. The doors opened again at 2 o'clock, but she had to wait for a superior officer. Martha finally got the documents signed at 3:30. Suitcase in tow, Martha arrived at the station where she found Miss Bull, the BCRC secretary, compiling a list of convoy participants as they appeared. She used a fountain pen filled with green ink, borrowed from a man, a physician, standing near her. Often, refugees came out of hiding just in time to board a moving train. And indeed, too, newsmen from the United Press and the Associated Press jumped on at the last minute. Martha's charges occupied one train car. Finally nearing the Dutch border, the convoy was ordered to disembark for customs inspection. Martha's effects were given only a cursory glance. But the Germans robbed the refugees of all their valuables, even their wedding rings off their fingers, Martha fumed. Waiting to ensure everyone got back on the train, she heard a cry from the rear of the customs shed. I ran back and opened the door before the guards could stop me. There were the newspaper men, stripped to the waists, bags torn apart. Asking if anyone spoke English and learning that no one did. She picked up a letter with the United States seal, hoping it would serve. This letter puts these men under my protection as American citizens, she asserted. You see the seal of the United States? They are members of my group going to London, and I will not leave without them. Waving Miss Bull's notes in the air, she declared, they are all on my list. Against all odds, she prevailed. The train soon reached the border, and Martha surrendered Miss Bull's list to the Dutch officials to check against the refugees' visas and passports. But, having jumped on the train at the last minute, the newsmen had not been registered by the BCRC secretary. The Dutch authorities barred their entry. Martha reached for a solution. I ran along the car looking for the doctor with the pen filled with green ink. With the pen, I wrote the names of the men on the reverse side of the list, and just before the train was to pull out, I found the passport officer. He quizzed her. I am sure the names were not there before, he argued, but she insisted, and they were allowed to board. It was, she said, the second near miss. Such a thin line between life and death.